something nearer. Maybe they don't want an answer, but nonetheless, that's what they did in 1974. And this is how it works. It is composed of 1,679 bits of information. Now, we get radio messages constantly coming from the stars, and vice versa. And the reason is that there is background noises that the stars make, and they're not necessarily at all intelligent messages. They're just noise. But if you get 1,679 bits of information transmitted by radio message, you listen, because it is a prime number. If you get a prime number coming across, you listen, because it means this is intelligent. And more so, because this particular prime number is the product of two other prime numbers, 23 and 73. And the suggestion is to split the bits of information in rows of 23 by 73, and you get this peculiar image. And what it is at the top you have a counting convention. Here you have information about the genes and DNA of the creature, the human creature, us, that is here. We're given data concerning the population on this planet and the position of our planet in a solar system. This represents the sun, and the third planet, our planet, is offset near the creature to show that we are from the third planet, planet Earth. Information about the telescope, the radio telescope, its size, and so forth. In short, what you're looking at here is the way that we're trying to communicate with an unknown civilization across time and space. And the reason we use this language, this astroglyphic language, this scientific language, is because there's no need sending a message in English or in Turkish or in French, simply because it doesn't work that way. They will not understand it. They will understand this nowhere, no matter where they are. They will understand this everywhere, in M13 or whatever galaxy we choose to send it to, if there are intelligent people there. So that's the idea. There is another one here, known as the Voyager message. It is stuck or inside a probe called Voyager 1 that was sent outside our solar system in 1976. It's just got out of our solar system in the last few years. And it's heading towards the stars. Again, information about coordinates of where we are, the Earth, information on how to play a record, apparently. There's a record inside that sleeve that is entitled The Sounds of the Earth. Whatever sounds they have, maybe Madonna singing or things like that. I don't know. Now, I'm going to be asking this question with all seriousness. Are we getting a message? Are we getting a message from whoever built that site? I am not suggesting that we are getting an extraterrestrial message, although some have. I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm suggesting with all seriousness, we are suggesting, Graham Hancock and myself, that we have all the ingredients of a clever, scientific, astroglyphic message. The way that we today are attempting to communicate with some distant civilization existing somewhere else. Are we getting a message across time from a lost source deep into our past? Somebody who is desperately trying to pass on a message. The ingredients are there. The question is it a message or not? Let's look at this more closely. You will recall that the emphasis of the pyramid builders was to ensure that the monuments were perfectly set along the north-south axis, the meridian axis. You're looking at a cross-section of the Great Pyramid along the north-south axis. And you would enter the monument on the north face, down a descending passageway. Here's the so-called subterranean chamber, up an ascending corridor, the so-called Queen's Chamber, into a grand gallery, into the so-called King's Chamber. Here, by the way, are the so-called relief chambers where these graffitis were found. And here are what Egyptologists still call today the air shafts. They haven't, whoever did this diagram hasn't even bothered to show shafts, although we know they exist. Indeed, one of them is the most mysterious shaft indeed. It has a little door at the end of it, and we'll be talking about this door and also the possible chamber under the Sphinx when I conclude my talk. The reason these shafts are not shown on this diagram is because the Egyptologists who did this diagram adhered to the so-called abandonment theory. They believed, they still believe, that the builder of the Great Pyramid abandoned the lower chamber, then moved into a higher chamber here, and then abandoned the second chamber to finally settle for the king's chamber, or what they call the king's chamber. You need this abandonment theory to make the tomb theory work, because you cannot have a tomb with 3 chambers, because they wouldn't have cut the body of the pharaoh in 3 parts, and therefore Egyptologists have convinced themselves that this is what they're looking at. Builders who changed their minds in a monument of that size and scale and finally ended up with a chamber above. Well, let me tell you this. You do not abandon such work. Indeed, you do not fool around with a monument like this when you are building a monument of 6.5 million tons of material. The architect does not fool around with it. I can tell you that. These are not abandoned chambers, as you will see. Indeed, certainly, they hold the key, this chamber in particular, to one of the major riddles of this monument. So, the meridian is the emphasis of the builders. But, having obsessively set the Great Pyramid on the ground, along the north-south axis, along this meridian axis, you come to another problem. They set the other 2 pyramids along an angle of 45 degrees to the meridian. And they've set a 3rd, smaller pyramid, offset from that diagonal angle. And you have to ask the question, the next point in the investigation is, why? What are they trying to do? What message is there? What glyph are we looking on the ground here? And that is what we have to answer. Well, people who attempted to break into the understanding of these stellar connections began in 1964. A major breakthrough came when 2 researchers, Virginia Trimble, an astronomer, and Alexander Badawi, an Egyptologist, who happily, for us, was also an architect. And they investigated the meaning of these so-called air shafts in the Great Pyramid. There are 2 of them heading south, you can see A and B, heading towards the south meridian, that particular area of the sky that the monument is locked to, and 2 others directed to the north meridian of the sky. And they had a hunch that these were not air shafts at all. Now, Badawi, being an architect who had studied every single tomb in Egypt and who had never seen any tomb ever ventilated, any monument that was supposed to be a tomb ventilated, for the very simple reason that it doesn't make sense to ventilate a dead body. There's no need to ventilate a dead body. It's as if you would take what's in your fridge and put it in the garden. That's the same analogy here. There is no need to ventilate a dead body. But even if they wanted to ventilate a dead body for reasons that they had, they would not build shafts on the incline, because it's a very difficult thing to do if you simply want ventilation. It's the same thing as building a chimney on the incline across this structure. It is a nightmare. It involves all sorts of problems, and it is unnecessary, because what you can do if you really want to ventilate this chamber is to leave a course of the masonry, a horizontal course, with a gap. That's all you need to do, all the way to the outside, and you would achieve ventilation. So obviously, these had a much more important and mysterious significance. And their hunch proved to be correct. They thought that these shafts were linked to the stars in the same way that the monument was. And what they found out is this. And in order to work out which stars and when, they had a hunch, of course, that it had something to do with the constellation of Orion, this constellation in the Duat of Osiris. And they had to use what Graham explained briefly, the precession phenomena, the precession of the equinoxes. And I will explain this extremely quickly because I want to dispense with all the jargon. Precession is one of those things that for some incredible reason we are not very familiar with it in the general daily knowledge that we have. We all know, we've known since we're children, we're taught this at school, that the Earth is a globe, that it rotates on its axis in 24 hours. We know that. We get the effect of night and day. Every schoolboy knows this. We know that the Earth revolves around the sun in 365 days and a quarter, and we get the effects of the season. But this planet has a third motion. It wobbles, and it wobbles very slowly indeed, in cycles of 26,000 years. We do not feel this wobble. What appears to happen is that if you were to observe the precessional cycle, now we can do that by using computers today. You can have the sky on your monitor screen, use a precessional program, and press the button and say, precess the sky, and the sky would appear to move in cycles of 26,000 years. And the effect you have is this. The sky, the star field, appears to seesaw backwards and forwards in 26,000 years. That is it. That is precession. That's all you need to know, and indeed, it's as simple as that. So, having established that the sky seesaws backwards and forwards, or appears to seesaw backwards and forwards in 26,000 years, if you were to freeze the constellation of Orion at its passage at the meridian, at the specific direction that the monument is locked at, and you were to observe this precession cycle, this is what you would see. The constellation of Orion would begin its present cycle in about 10,500 BC. At the time of the Pyramid Age, 2,450 BC or so, it would be at 45 degrees altitude as seen from the Great Pyramid. And today, roughly today, it would have reached its maximum position in that cycle. And then it would begin to go down in a couple of centuries and start another cycle. In short, up and down in cycles of 26,000 years. In this current cycle, 10,500 BC is the beginning. And what they discovered is this, that the southern shaft in the King's Chamber pointed to Orion's belt, the center of the constellation of Orion, the center of this Duat region, this Osirian land of the first time in the sky. In case you are wondering how this works physically, this is a diagram that shows it very well. Imagine yourself standing in front of the Great Pyramid, looking at the meridian, looking due south, and speeding up the precession cycle. The constellation of Orion would be here at the beginning of its current cycle in 10,500 BC, at this altitude at the Pyramid Age, and today this is where you would see it. This is what happened. And this is what they seem to have had in mind, to create a link between the Great Pyramid and that area on the ground to the heartland, the very center of this Duat Osirian region in the sky. And here we come to some interesting terminology, because they had a name for this region in the sky, this central region. They called it Ros Tau. It literally means the entrance to the afterworld. And because we're dealing with a stellar world, I will use the terminology that the BBC used when they did a documentary on the Orion mystery. They used the terminology, the gateway to the stars. Or if you prefer the Hollywood version, the Stargate. The Stargate. You will see that this Stargate is also a time gate. But let's carry on with the sequence of our logic. Now here is another odd thing. They had a name for the area where stands the three pyramids and the Sphinx, the Giza necropolis. We call this the Giza necropolis. They called it Rostau. They also called it the Stargate. And therefore, what you have here is two Stargates, one on the ground, one in the sky, linked by a shaft. That is what we have. Now, 20 years after Badawi and Virginia Trimble in 1983, I came along and I worked out the alignment of the southern shaft in the Queen's Chamber, the so-called abandoned chamber with its abandoned shafts. And I worked out the alignment, and not surprisingly, I found out that it pointed to the star Sirius, the star of Isis, the companion of Osiris Orion. And therefore, it was obvious that the pyramids were not mute at all. They were expressing themselves in very powerful stellar language, in these astroglyphic means. And they were directing our attention to these specific stars in the sky. And that is what they want us to do. They went to a lot of trouble to do that. And we should follow the cues. They tell me that the human mind works like a hologram, that you have a left brain and a right brain, and somewhere in the middle is an interface, and you get those bright ideas in the morning, like who's supposed to do the dishes tonight, and things like that. I'm not sure how it works. I don't sense a left brain and a right brain, but I know that something of the sort happened in my mind in 1983, because I began to look at that Duat region, that sky region, with the Milky Way, the Celestial Nile, and so forth, and I was thinking pyramids. I began to think in a sort of dualistic form, like those people who wrote the texts. As above, so below type of thinking. And when I isolated all the pyramids of the 4th dynasty, here are those Rostau pyramids, those Giza pyramids, those gateway pyramids, I began to see that there was quite a striking similarity with the Milky Way and the Nile and the layout of the pyramids. And the next thing that was obvious to do was to have a damn good look at this Rostau in the sky, those 3 stars of the belt of Orion. And here is a picture taken by the Lowell Observatory. And as I drew a line across the 2 stars of equal magnitude, or equal size, apparently, I noticed that the 3rd, smaller star was offset to the left or to the east. And I quickly realized that what you had was a correlation. That the monuments on the ground, the Rostau on the ground, was in correlation with its counterpart in the sky. Now, there was a problem, and this is it. This is what they must have had in mind, to correlate those 3 holographic stars, architectural stars, call them what you like, with these 3 stars in the sky. The land, the heartland, the Rostau of the Duat, with those 3 pyramids representing the Rostau, the gateway, on the ground. Now, this is what they must have had in mind. But there is a problem. And here it is. If you were to observe the passage of the 3 stars of Orion's belt, the Rostau stars, at the meridian in 2500 BC, although the images are the same, the picture of the stars appears to be tilted far too much at an angle of 75 degrees to the meridian, not matching what you have on the ground. This is a bit dark because of the light. Here is the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd pyramid, with its characteristic direction of 45 degrees to the meridian. The stars appear to be in the wrong place at that date. The wrong place. Well, perhaps the question should be formulated in a different way. Maybe the stars are not in the wrong place, but at the wrong time. And the word time, like these holographic thoughts, began to float in my mind. Time, 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 time. And when I met Graham Hancock, we tossed these ideas backwards and forwards. And suddenly we said, wait a minute, wait a minute. This is a glyph on the ground representing the deity Osiris, who is told by the text to be the god of the first time. The stars have a first time. And that in our current precession cycle, they begin their cycle. They have their first time in 10,500 BC. Are they trying to tell us something? Are they trying to tell us, consider these stars, you know now what to look at. But remember, they have to do with the first time of this deity. And we tried it. And when we did that, when we brought the stars down on our computer to 10,500 BC at the beginning, at the first time of their cycle, we got a lock. The stars conveniently moved and settled at 45 degrees. Let me explain how this works, how you can do it on your computers. This is not speculation. This is not theory. This is astronomical fact. The question is not whether this is a fact or not, it's whether this is a coincidence. And I hope to convince you as I go along that it is nothing of the sort. You're looking at a computer reconstruction of the sky in 2500 BC. And here is the three stars of Orion's belt crossing the meridian in 2500 BC. And you can see that they are slanted sharply at about 75 degrees to the meridian. And the Milky Way, too, is kind of skew with. But if we go to the beginning of the current precession cycle, to the first time of the stars, this is what we have. In 10,500 BC, the stars conveniently lock at the angle required to match them on the ground, and so does the Milky Way align itself with its counterpart in the sky. If it is a coincidence, it is 1,000,000 to 1 coincidence. But let me drive this point strongly. And it's important, because if we are right, and I believe we are, then the implications are tremendous. And this information will lead us precisely to where the legacy is, as you will see. Here is a computer reconstruction of the belt stars in 2500 BC. I've superimposed a protractor on the screen. Here is the meridian, and here are the three stars crossing the meridian at their angle of 75 degrees in 2500 BC. What we would like them to be is to match the 45-degree angle that is achieved by the three pyramids. And when you go down to their first time in 10,500 BC, this is what happens. They lock. Facts, verifiable facts. What they're telling us is that the land where these pyramids stand, this glyph of Osiris, the glyph of Osiris, the god of the first time, is done on the ground in a manner that represents the stars as they were seen in the first time. That is the message. This is the land of the first time, or if you prefer, the land of Genesis. Let's check this out. The first indication that we weren't looking at a coincidence was this. Although they called the necropolis Rostau, they had another name for it. They called it the horizon. It's as if they imagined the three pyramids with the Sphinx, as you shall see also within that area, encompassed by an artificial horizon on the ground. And it's divided into two parts. We've said that the eastern horizon is where the stars rise, and curiously here on the western side of this artificial horizon, at 27 degrees from the center of the horizon, at a bearing of 27 degrees, are three little pyramids on the edge of the artificial horizon. It's inviting us to consider the setting of certain stars. These three pyramids look like a reduced scale model of the other three, but not at an angle of 45 degrees to the meridian, but at a right angle, east-west. The stars set in the west. If we look at the three stars of Orion's belt setting in the west in 10,500 BC, we again get a lock. Here they are at a bearing of 27 degrees from the center of the artificial horizon. In fact, what we've got is a reproduction of the artificial horizon mimicking what is on the real horizon. Again, a lock. But there is something else that is extremely important about those stars and that date. And this is it. When the stars of Orion's belt, when this gateway, this star gate, strikes the meridian in 10,500 BC, when they strike to match the pattern on the ground of their counterparts, they do so at a very specific time, and that it only occurs, I emphasize, in 10,500 BC. They strike the meridian when the sun is rising due east on the day of the spring equinox. Remember Graham and me standing atop of the pyramid, looking down and pointing somewhere on the day of the spring equinox. Because what we're pointing at is this. And let me explain before what has happened, before you see this thing that we're trying to see in the sky. We have, in a sense, traveled through a stargate.